Castles, by their very nature, are designed to be hard for an opposing force to attack. A strong castle can mean a relatively small number of men can hold out against a much larger force for an extended period of time. Attacking and defending a castle is very much a battle of will and who falters first. Most commanders would rather not force an attack unless they absolutely have to. Even with great numbers, you could eventually overwhelm the defenders. The sheer design and defendability of a castle means you will take heavy losses in the process. That's why most conflicts involving castles are generally sieges. The attacker will encircle the castle, stopping resources such as food from entering, and also stops the defenders from directly fleeing. You can then wait and starve out your foe, or slowly whittle down their numbers with siege engines. There are, of course, factors that will force an attack, such as seasons, weather, the pressures of time, but any assault will be a bloody affair for both sides. Many sieges are broken not by attack, but by surrender, when one side's position becomes untenable. In this video, we're going to be breaking down what I think are the most defendable castles in Westeros. Of course, given their status as great seats, the likes of Winterfell and Casterly Rock and their like will of course be covered. For the most part, the fact they have become great seats of power means they are effectively the most defendable places in Westeros. So I also want to spend a little bit of time putting some focus in some of the lesser known castles in the Seven Kingdoms that are extremely defendable or have a unique aspect to them that gives them some kind of advantage. The Prince of Winterfell, burned and tumbled, its people scattered and slain. The glass gardens were smashed and hot water gushed from the cracked walls to steam beneath the sun. How can you be a prince of some place you might never see again? The Thoughts of Bran Stark. A Storm of Swords Chapter 9, Bran 1. If we take a look at some of the great houses of Westeros, who of course control some of the most important seats in Westeros, all of these castles are going to be highly defendable in an attack. But each of them has some sort of unique quirk or twist that comes into play. For example, let's take a look at the seat of House Stark, Winterfell. The whole complex that makes up Winterfell is huge, and with that, so are its walls. The key word there is walls. Winterfell has two sets of walls, with a dry moat between them, the outer wall being 80 feet high and the inner 100 feet. So even the outer wall is huge, let alone the inner. So as an attacker, you have to get past this first wall, all the while being attacked by bowmen, then get across the deep and large dry moat while under attack, then assault and take the even larger inner wall. What makes this double wall system even better is if you as a defender lose the outer walls, you can fall back past the inner walls, raise the drawbridges spanning the moat, and the attackers have to begin a fresh second siege on an even stronger inner wall. You would take huge losses directly assaulting Winterfell in this manner. But even then, Winterfell has two more defensive features that would make sieging it a real test. It has these glass gardens, greenhouses, which is used to grow food, even in times of winter. So it makes the strategy of starving out a defender much more complicated and prolongs how long defenders can withhold. Now, the amount of food Winterfell can produce isn't going to be enough to feed a huge defending force, but even a very small number of men can hold the castle due to the double wall design. Food will still eventually run out. It will just take a little bit longer. Seasons can prove to be a huge issue for an attacker, in a way that doesn't necessarily affect a defender as much. All the while it's summer, autumn and spring, you can keep up the supply chains allowing for an ongoing siege. But as soon as the harsh northern winters hit, maintaining that siege is going to be much more difficult, especially when your army is going to be out in the open in effectively tents, receiving the full brunt of the elements. At the same time, Winterfell makes this seasonal issue even more of a problem, as the castle was built above hot spring, whose warm water are piped through the castle, keeping the defenders relatively warm during the winter. But as we know, while Winterfell is highly defendable, it's not impregnable. We know a King Royce II Bolton once burned Winterfell prior to the coming of the Andals. However, we don't know how much of the current Winterfell reflects that time period. But As we see in the main books, Theon Greyjoy is almost bloodlessly able to take Winterfell with a very small band of Iron Men using stealth. However, something to remember is Theon had a key advantage, the fact the castle was very lightly garrisoned due to most of the men being south with Robb Stark fighting the War of the Five Kings. But most importantly, that Theon, having growing up in Winterfell, had an intimate knowledge of it. Knowledge not your average attacker is necessarily going to possess. At Highgarden, we have many spiders amongst the flowers. So long as they keep to themselves, we let them spin their little webs, but if they get underfoot, we step on them. Olenna Tyrell to Sansa Stark. Storm of Swords Chapter 6, Sansa 1. While Highgarden, the seat of House Tyrell, is likely the most beautiful seat in Westeros, it doesn't mean it's not as defendable as the other castles. Highgarden is located on a broad verdant hill overlooking the river Manda, which in itself is a good defensive element. There's a reason a lot of real-world castles are built on hilltops. The position of your castle is almost as important as the castle itself, but Highgarden is also surrounded by 3 ring white stone crenulated walls that increase in height. While a formidable bulwark, they are not nearly as tall as the likes of Winterfell, but it's not the walls that help make Highgarden so defendable. Between the outer and middle walls is a famous labyrinth made of effectively hedges, rose plants and brambles, which while it entertains the residents and their guests, also drastically slows intruders. So unlike say a traditional moat or a dry moat, where you simply have to cross in a straight line, the attacking foes have to work their way through this maze, all the while being stuck in between 2 sets of walls and being attacked from above. While we have little lore about these labyrinths, I would be very surprised there wasn't some traps or ambush points along the way. So while not a conventional defensive feature, it's a powerful one. Highgarden shows us how terrain and natural environment play a role in the defensibility of a castle, but no other castle demonstrates this idea more than Casterly Rock, the seat of House Lannister. When you attack Casterly Rock, you are effectively attacking a mountain. Casterly Rock is carved out of a colossal stone hill sat beside the Sunset Sea. According to George R. R. Martin, the rock is 2 leagues long, which is about 6 miles from west to east, and has a width of 2 miles from north to south. Its peak is about 2,100 feet high, which makes it 3 times higher than the highest point of the wall, and taller than the high tower of Old Town as well. Now the rock has several defensive features, greatly in its favour, that make it an already imposing fortress, and a great place to defend from. Firstly, the sheer size of the rock cannot be understated. The size of the army you would need to properly encircle it is huge. But given the fact you are attacking effectively a mountain, well, we don't have any recorded cases of it, it's reasonable to assume that conventional siege engines would have little effect on the structure in the way they would a traditional castle. Given the interior of Casterly Rock used to be old gold mines, there's a huge amount of space inside to store resources such as food. So much so, starving out a defending force, while still possible, would be no easy task. If not, in effect, it's practically impossible. There's a really strong chance if you had a winter that lasted a year or two, the attacking force's supply lines would become so stretched and resources so low, starving out the rock would be no longer viable. Of course, food is not the be-all and end-all. There's also the idea of fresh drinking water. There is some suggestion in lore the Casterly Rock has freshwater wells within its depths, meaning theoretically, unless something happened to that water source, fresh drinking water is not going to be an issue. Even if something did happen, there will be alternatives to water such as wine and ale, which again can easily be stored within the rock itself. The base of the rock contains a large sea-carved cavern with a dock, meaning to fully encircle Casterly Rock, you're going to need to blockade the ocean routes in and out. As we see in wars such as the Dance of the Dragons and Robert's Rebellion, even the best sea blockades are not impregnable. Given the sheer open space of the ocean, the limited number of ships, if enough ships loyal to House Lannister try, some will inevitably slip through and be able to resupply Casterly Rock. I mean, think of Davos Seaworth. His single ship full of onions managed to break the blockade of Storm's End and provide the garrison enough food to hold out until the end of the war. Plus, as we know, House Lannister has a huge fleet of ships, so you're taking the fact you could even blockade Casterly Rock from the ocean for granted, especially when Lannisport is so close to Casterly Rock itself. Casterly Rock also has countless defensive measures you would expect from any great castle. The face of the mountain has windows and arrow slits scattered all over. They look small from the outside, but that's only an illusion due to the huge size of the rock. As millennia has passed, its natural defences have been expanded with walls, gates and watchtowers. All this makes Casterly Rock practically impregnable, and well, according to George R. R. Martin himself, this is the case. He said in a December 2022 blog post, all these things make Casterly Rock practically the strongest and most impregnable seat in all of Westeros. The Eyrie is impregnable. You saw it for yourself. No enemy could ever reach us up here. Liza Arryn to Catelyn Stark. A Game of Thrones Chapter 34. Catelyn 6. One of the most lauded defensive structures in Westeros, and one that's come out on top of fan polls about the most defensive castles, is of course the Eyrie, the seat of House Arryn in the Vale. But the Eyrie is a perfect example of how a castle can be nigh on impregnable to attack, but at the same time have a single fundamental weakness that can effectively make all these defensive capabilities null and void. The Eyrie is situated in the Mountains of the Moon on the shoulders of a peak known as the Giant's Lance, several thousand feet above the valley below. Although the actual castle itself is small compared to the other great seats of Westeros, the fact it's built several thousand feet high on a mountain peak definitely makes up for that. To reach the castle itself, an invading army would have to first overcome the Bloody Gate, guarding the high road into the Vale. Once within the Vale itself, the Gates of the Moon guard the base of the Giant's Lance. Steep stone steps are carved into the Giant's Lance and creep up the mountainside from the Gates of the Moon. They are too narrow for horses, but accessible by mules. Travellers on the staircase are exposed to defenders in 3 way castles. So before you can even try and assault the Eyrie itself, an attack needs to first siege the Bloody Gate, which is no easy task given you can only attack it from one direction, and your army is effectively walking into a compact killing ground. But if you do get past Bloody Gate, you then have to deal with the Gates of the Moon and climb the Giant's Lance, being attacked from the way castles as you climb. Given how treacherous the path up the mountain is, you're effectively going to be a sitting duck. So even if you do manage to get past the last way castle, there's only now 2 ways up to the Eyrie, and both are near impossible to assault. Carved into the rock within the Giant's Lance, attackers can climb a ladder-like chimney structure which leads from the final way castle up to the castle's undercellar. Alternatively, a wicker basket and 6 great oaken buckets are drawn on long iron chains between the Eyrie and the way castle. Also vitally important, the Eyrie has a huge storeroom, as large as any of the other great seats such as Winterfell, where they can store enough supply to last a very long siege. But all this impregnability can be undone with a single unavoidable fact: winter. Given the elevation of the Eyrie is not exactly the warmest place even in the summer, with the Giant's Lance still capped with snow, but in the winter the castle gets so cold it's almost impossible to live in. Thus during the winter years, House Arryn and the castle's household relocate to the relatively warmer and more comfortable Gates of the Moon. While yes, the Gates of the Moon themselves are very hard to assault, they are nowhere near as impregnable as the Eyrie itself. So while defensively the Eyrie is often thought as by fans as the most impregnable castle in Westeros, the fact it's almost unlivable during winter is a huge, huge issue that negates any of those defensive capabilities. This Storm's End is an old place. There are spells woven into the stone, dark walls that no shadow can pass. Ancient, forgotten, yet still in place. Melisandre to Davos Seaworth. A Clash of Kings Chapter 42. Davos 2. What I really like about the lore we have about Storm's End from the books is it both shows us the positives and negatives of defending a castle at the same time. Storm's End is the seat of House Baratheon, the Lord Paramount of the Stormlands, and before that, for thousands of years, the seat of House Durrandon, the ancient Storm Kings. It's one of the strongest castles in Westeros, and is said to be protected by spells woven into its very walls that prevent magic from affecting it. How much of that is true, we cannot really say. Storm's End is surrounded by a massive outer curtain wall, 100 feet high and 40 feet thick on its thinnest side, and nearly 80 feet thick on the seaward side. So while the walls not only as tall as Winterfell's, being between 40 and 80 feet thick is absolutely unimaginable. It really makes the use of traditional siege weapons much less effective given just how much sheer stone you'd have to get through. The wall is also smoothed and curving. The stones are so well placed they perfectly fit together, so much so that wind can find no purchase, but at the same time this can also cause issues for attackers. Even if you did have ladders tall enough to scale the walls, the curved and smooth surface gives the ladders very little purchase. On the seaward side there is a 150-foot drop below the wall into the sea, which makes it impossible to attack from that side. Even if you did manage to get through the walls, Storm's End itself has only one tower, a colossal drum tower crowned with formidable battlements, making it look like a huge spiked fist thrusting towards the sky. The tower is so large it can comfortably contain a granary, barracks, armories, the feast hall, and the Lord's Chamber all at once. In a way, it would be like having to attack a whole separate castle. The seaward side of Storm's End stands upon Durran's Point, a high white cliff overlooking the sea, which makes it impossible to attack from that side. There is a tunnel accessible only at high tide, but is treacherous because of the jagged rocks. It leads to a cavern beneath the castle. The passageway is guarded by murder holes in its ceilings and can be lit by torches. A portcullis with narrow barred gates guards entry from the tunnel into the cavern. So while this might seem like a weak point, it's a very highly defendable passage. You also have to consider, given the treacherous waters of Shipbreaker Bay, even getting enough men into the tunnel in the first place is going to be a difficult undertaking. During the siege of Storm's End during Robert's Rebellion, the castle was held by his younger brother Stannis. For most of the rebellion, Storm's End was under siege by Lord Mace Tyrell, whom was loyal to King Aerys II. Soon after Lord Mace Tyrell began the siege of Storm's End, Lord Paxter Redwine arrived with the Redwine fleet from the Arbor and closed off Shipbreaker Bay to all trade, essentially cutting off Storm's End. The siege continued for the better part of a year, with the garrison having to eat horses and cats, and they were nearly even forced to eat their own dead. Mace Tyrell and his bannermen, such as Paxter Redwine and Lord Mathis Rowan, tactically feasted within sight of the walls, tormenting the hungry men within. There was at least one breach in discipline within Storm's End, when the castle's master-at-arms, Sir Gawain Wild, and 3 knights were caught trying to sneak out the postern gate to surrender. Stannis Baratheon prepared to have them hurled at the Tyrell host via catapult, but Maester Cressin convinced Stannis to imprison the men, since the garrison might need to eat the dead if their food indeed ran out. Garwin eventually died in his cell during the siege. Davos Seaworth, a notorious smuggler, eventually slipped through the Redwine fleet's lines one night and entered the tunnels beneath Storm's End, with a ship loaded with onions and salt fish for the starving garrison. This food allowed the garrison to survive long enough for Robert's friend and ally, Lord Eddard Stark, to march south after the Battle of the Trident, in which Rhaegar Targaryen was killed by Stannis' elder brother Robert, and then the ensuing sack of King's Landing, which effectively ended the war. With King Aerys II dead and the surviving Targaryens fled to Dragonstone, Mace Tyrell dropped his banners as soon as Eddard Stark arrived, when the rebels appeared on the field outside Storm's End. Storm's End is clearly a highly defendable castle, but is also a great example of the biggest threat when defending a siege: time. Most of these great seats can withstand a siege as long as 3 conditions are met. You have enough food, you have enough morale and mental fortitude, and you can withstand the elements, such as a cold winter. During the siege of Storm's End, winter was not a current factor, so Stannis Baratheon had to contend with 2 of these: lack of food and morale. He dealt with the morale issue well enough, but if not for Davos Seaworth, it's questionable if he could have held out until Eddard Stark broke the siege. It was late afternoon when they sighted Riverrun. Rising from the narrow point where the Tumblestone joined the Redfall, the Tully Castle looked like a great stone ship with its prow pointed downriver. Its sandstone walls were drenched in red gold light and seemed higher and thicker than Jaime had remembered. The Thoughts of Jaime Lannister, A Feast for Crows, Chapter 33, Jaime 5. Riverrun is the ancestral castle of House Tully, the Lord Paramount of the Trident. It is situated in the Western Riverlands at the confluence of the Tumblestone and Red Fork rivers. Riverrun is a strong 3-sided castle, although not especially large. It is 1/10 of the size of Harrenhal. Riverrun is bordered on the northern side by the Tumblestone River and on the southern side by the Red Fork, while on the west, a third side faces a massive man-made ditch. In times of danger, the sluice gates can be opened to fill a wide moat, and leave the castle surrounded on all three sides by water, turning Riverrun into an island, and leaving it practically unassailable. Properly garrisoned, Riverrun can hold supplies for men and horses for as long as 2 years. A garrison of 200 men is larger than Riverrun requires in most circumstances. Given that Riverrun is a much smaller seat than Winterfell and Casterly Rock, it can give us just an idea just how long these larger, better supplied castles could last in a drawn-out siege before they ran out of food, given Riverrun could hold out for 2 years. The strategic position of Riverrun brought wealth to House Tully, who guarded the western riverlands from the Kingdom of the Rock. The castle has rarely been surrendered and has never fallen by attack. The Tullys have ruled Riverrun and its rich lands for at least 1,000 years as a result of this. Arguably the biggest advantage Riverrun has is of course the ability to fill the moat and turn Riverrun into an island fortress, meaning you can only assault the castle with boats, which is no easy task given their entire crossing would be under fire from the battlements of Riverrun. In Jaime Lannister's point of view chapters in A Feast of Crows, we get a detailed look at the siege of Riverrun, which has become a stalemate. Brynden Tully, who was in command of the castle, is well supplied with a strong group of loyal men, while the Frey Lannister attackers, while sieging the castle with a large number, were unwilling to truly press an attack. Eventually, through coercion, Riverrun is taken by the Freys and Lannisters through surrender. What we see in Jaime's point of view is just how hard sieging any castle is, let alone one as well defended as Riverrun, and how most attackers would try and find a peaceful solution than assault the castle directly. Now, I briefly want to talk about the Red Keep, Sunspear, the High Tower and Dragonstone. All of these castles are incredibly hard to capture and are very defensively strong, just as much as all of those we've talked about so far. But the key difference is when assaulting these seats, you're not just dealing with a very strong, well-manned and well-supplied castle, but also the huge city, or in the case of Dragonstone, island, where they are located. Sieging an island or a city is very different than sieging a castle, with so many more factors at play that make it a much more complicated task, both in terms of attack and defense. So these kinds of castles will have a video all of their own coming soon, given how different they are. But for the rest of this video, I want to look away from the great seats of power and look at some of the castles of smaller houses, which are incredibly powerful, or perhaps have a unique element to them that makes them stand out from the bulk of the normal castles in the Seven Kingdoms. The Twins is the seat of House Frey, and while not a large castle, presents some unique defensive elements that would make trying to attack it so much of a hassle, it might just be easier to pay their toll. The Twins, like its name suggests, is in fact two identical castles, one on each bank of the Green Fork of the Trident, where the river runs swift and deep, making fording the river anywhere for leagues almost impossible. The castles have high curtain walls, deep moats, a barbican and a portcullis. Much like Riverrun, channels have been dug to form the moats, turning each castle into an island when the drawbridge is raised. The bridge between the two castles is guarded in the middle by the water tower, which has command over the Green Fork itself. The structure has arrow slits and murder holes and a portcullis for defence. To properly siege the Twins, you have to encircle both castles at the same time, but the issue with this is coordination. You would have to have an army already on the other side of the Green Fork due to the Twins itself being the only crossing for leagues around. If you could not do this, you are then going to have to attack one side of the river, take the castle, which is already challenging, then fight your way across the bridge under fire from the water tower. You then have to take the water tower itself, fight your way across the second half of the bridge, then assault the second castle. It would be a long, drawn-out and bloody affair, and a testament to the clever use of natural terrain House Frey had access to. They can exert whatever toll they want because they know very well few lords would be fool enough to try and take the Twins by force. Starfall, the seat of House Dane in southwest Dawn, near the border with Reach and Old Town, has a similar defensive tactic as Riverrun and the Twins, using its natural terrain to effectively make the castle an island. In many ways, there's not that much special about the defensive structure of Starfall. Like any castle, it's always going to be hard to attack. But Starfall, unlike Riverrun, is located physically on a small island in the Torrentine River. Because Starfall is located near the mouth of the river, the water is therefore tidal, and thus at high tide, Starfall is only accessible by a boat. The river is very treacherous and fast flowing, with men and horses often being swept out to sea, never to be seen again. Factoring in all of this, you can't physically siege Starfall in a traditional manner due to the fact the river level rises and falls with the tide. If you try and set up a camp or encirclement, half your men are probably going to drown. Thus you have to sit on the banks of the river, lessening the true impact of the siege. The Torrentine River really is Starfall's secret weapon. When you read a lot of the chapters from the northern point of view during the War of Five Kings, something that comes up multiple times is the importance of Moat Cailin in the defence of the north. It's an ancient stronghold of the First Men on the northern edge of the Great Swamp known as the Neck, on the very southern border of the north. Despite Moat Cailin being one of the north's most important strongholds, much of it now stands in ruins. But thanks to its tactical advantageous position, what's left of the castle is a formidable prospect to attack. It commands the causeway, the only safe route for armies to travel through the swamps of the Neck. Thus, Moat Cailin is effectively a natural choke point, which has protected the north from southern invasions for thousands of years. You cannot march an army north without passing Moat Cailin. The Crannogmen of the Neck know unmapped routes through the swamp, such as narrow trails between the bogs and wet roads through the reeds that only boats can follow. However, given the Crannogmen and their leaders of House Reed are sworn to House Stark, in the event of an attack, the Crannogmen have been known to strike with stealth from the reeds, hiding in places men without knowledge of the swamp can go. Today, only great blocks of black basalt lay scattered about, half sunk into the ground where the walls of Moat Cailin once stood, and the keep itself has rotted away. The remaining 3 towers, which are now covered in thick green moss, command the causeway from all sides, so enemies must pass between them. Attackers face constant fire from the other towers should they attempt to attack one of the others, wading through chest-deep waters and crossing a moat field of lizard lions. So while a ruin, this strong position and use of natural terrain makes Moat Cailin nigh on impossible to attack without huge losses. What it proves is even a small castle, or in this case a ruin, can do just as good a job as a defensive structure, as long as it's in a powerful strategic position. I also briefly want to talk about Castamere, the now ruined former seat of House Rain, because on paper, Castamere should have been just as impenetrable as Casterly Rock for very similar reasons. But yet House Rain still fell, and the halls are now left to decay. Like the Rock, Castamere used to be a gold and silver mine. Thus, House Rain carved out their seat in the deep underground mining tunnels. After building a curtain wall to guard the entrance with 2 stout towers, the Rains constructed their halls. After building a curtain wall to guard the entrance of the mine, along with 2 stout towers, as the gold and silver dried up, the mines below were widened and converted into halls, galleries and bedchambers, and a vast underground ballroom. While the surface fortifications resembled those of a petty minor lord or even a landed knight, 9/10 of the castle was subterranean. During the Rain-Tarbeck revolt, the Rains retreated to Castamere after the destruction of Tarbeck Hall. With Roger Rain wounded and many of their men killed in battle, the Red Lion's brother Sir Reynard abandoned the surface castle for the safety of the mine's oak and iron gate. In theory, what should now have happened was a long drawn-out siege, given the highly defendable position of Castamere. But Lord Tytos Lannister's heir, the young Sir Tywin, ignored Reynard's offer of parley and had his miners bury Castamere's entrance beneath stone. Given this was the only way in and out of the castle, House Rain were effectively trapped inside unless Tywin chose to excavate the entrance. Some inside of Castamere might have assumed this was Tywin's effective way of maintaining a siege and to whittle down morale and supplies inside Castamere until they surrendered, but this was far from the case. The Lannisters then dammed a nearby pool's stream and diverted it into the mine entrance, slowly but surely flooding the underground chambers of Castamere and drowning those trapped inside. Tywin also had the surface buildings put to the torch. The fate of the Rains of Castamere is now remembered in the legendary song, the reins of Castamere. What the case of Castamere shows us, even these castles deemed as impenetrable might still have methods that could make all these defences null and void. Collapsing the mine entrance and flooding the interior with a dam, the stream, is not a solution even the most tactically savvy commander would have come up with. It took someone as smart, bold, determined and ruthless as Tywin Lannister to come up with such a plan. Who knows? Maybe even one day the likes of Casterly Rock could similarly fall. But when you look at the context of all the lore behind these castles, Casterly Rock on paper does seem like the only one which is truly impregnable. Don't get me wrong, I understand why the Eyrie would be the top of many people's lists, and I understand why many fans view it this way, but the fact you might not even be able to live there for possibly years at a time is a huge issue, and really negates the strong defensive elements of the Eyrie. And the likes of Winterfell, again, seems like this mighty impregnable fortress, which it is, but under the right circumstances, such as we see with Theon Greyjoy's capture of the castle, it too can fall. Perhaps the answer to this question is there isn't really such a thing as an impregnable castle, just that maybe Casterly Rock hasn't truly been put to the test as of yet, due to its sheer scale and reputation.